Our story begins as he and 99 others accidentally end up in a high-stakes game where the winner stands to gain a staggering reward of 100 million yuan, though the starting capital is a mere 50 yuan. If you were in his shoes, how would you survive? As a professional, from the moment he first saw the theory behind the game, he quickly located a river nearby. The system's electronic voice welcomed the 100 players, tasking them to demonstrate their skills in this challenge. With only 50 yuan, the goal is simple yet daunting: survive for 7 days. The winner will receive 100 million yuan. Yes, you heard that correctly. 100 million yuan. The promise of a fortune repeated like a mantra until the voice finally went silent. The silence was heavy. The system asked if any cowards wanted to withdraw now while they still could. But who would back out now? 7 days later, he could only survive in the water, surrounded by 6 men in cheap clothes. With his 50 yuan, he bought some basic food and supplies, telling himself he just needed to save every bit of money possible, waiting for the first foolish person to give up as the crowd walked along, filled with a sense of boredom. It was a good start, really. Not a single player withdrew, and so the rules of the game officially took effect. There was no turning back. All 100 players were positioned. "Welcome to the airport," the system announced. Before his eyes, a flash of white light erupted, revealing a modern airport terminal. The airport was massive, stretching until it vanished from sight, with crowds of people walking about. It was impossible to tell who was a player and who was an NPC. Inside his game tent, there were 50 people gathered. At the same time, his screen displayed 3 vital stats: food, water, and energy. For the moment, all 3 were completely full, but we know that won't last. He set out to find a suitable shop to check the prices, but when he reached the refrigerated section, a dry, shocked gasp escaped him. A single bottle of water cost 15 yuan. It was practically highway robbery. As he looked closer, his heart began to sink further and further with every price tag. Small cakes were 50 yuan, sauces were 40, and even basic flour cakes were 10 yuan each. To be honest, even the cheapest steamed bun cost 18 yuan. With a daily budget of only 7 yuan, he couldn't even afford half a bottle of water. A heavy-set man nearby, whom we'll call Pongzi, looked at him with clear unease written across his face. The man muttered that they were doomed, as 50 yuan was only enough for 3 bottles of water. He felt like crying, realizing the system's prices were far more brutal than he had first imagined. Other players rushed into the shop, their faces pale with panic as the reality of the situation set in. Pongzi pulled him aside, trying to sound brave, and suggested they team up to survive. He told him not to be afraid, insisting that they would be much stronger if they stayed together. Pongzi even threw a few clumsy punches into the air, promising to protect him from anyone who caused trouble. It wasn't a very convincing display, and since he understood the game's cutthroat rules, he wasn't looking for a partner. He politely declined the offer and left the shop to search for a better way. His first mission was finding free water, so he headed toward the airport restrooms and found the sinks. He carefully filled 2 containers with water to ensure he had enough to drink for the day. And just like that, the water problem was solved for 0 cost. Now, he needed a source of energy. He spotted a restaurant where the condiment tables were stocked with bowls of white sugar, honey, and brown sugar. In a survival situation, sugar is a vital source of energy, and he knew exactly what to do. Sugar packets can be a lifesaver in a crisis to prevent exhaustion. We see him walk over, moving with such natural ease that it looked as if he were just finding things at home. A large handful of sugar packets and some creamers were in his hands in an instant. The entire process took only 2 seconds, and then he casually strolled out of the restaurant. He found a secluded street and emptied 2 packets of sugar into his mouth. To be honest, the sugar dissolved instantly, bringing a fleeting sense of relief. The energy problem was solved, and the cost was 0. The airport air was freezing, almost like being inside a refrigerator. The system likely did this on purpose, as the cold makes the body burn energy much faster. He could only wait quietly for the temperature to drop, hoping to conserve his strength. He even found a discarded bag where someone had left more sugar packets behind. As time passed, the pangs of hunger became increasingly intense. By 8 o'clock that evening, he approached a restaurant where they were selling leftover food at a discount. He felt a faint, warm sensation in his stomach, though his anxiety about his remaining funds burned just as hot. He calculated that a 30 yuan plate of food should now be priced at 15 yuan, but that still wasn't enough. As closing time drew nearer, the discounts would likely be even greater, perhaps even free. Every coin saved was a chance at life. He sat on a chair in front of the restaurant and closed his eyes to rest. At that moment, 20 or 30 people came running from all directions toward the dining area. The small entrance to the restaurant was immediately swallowed by a desperate crowd. In the chaos, we see some people clutching their money while others simply grabbed what they could. People were scrambling for plates and tables while the shop staff tried to maintain order. But it was useless. Within minutes, every scrap of food in the restaurant was gone. In the shopping frenzy, even the plates he had been watching were swept away. The successful buyers had looks of pure, life-saving joy on their faces. As for the rest, they were left beaten and dejected on the floor, glancing around with growing unease. One could only hear the sounds of suspicion and the weeping of other players. By then, his food gauge had already dropped by 70%. He took a deep breath to calm the gnawing ache in his stomach. Looking past the crowd, he turned his gaze upward, toward the massive flight information screen, which flickered with a relentless sea of red status updates. It was finally time to show his true capabilities. In these flight zones, players could move anywhere, even without ticket money. One could reach the boarding gates. He quickly scanned the large screen, focusing his attention on several lines of cancellation notices. Only the red and black text of delayed flights mattered to him now. He had been tracking those specific lines for 6 hours, so he began walking toward a boarding gate with weak, steady steps. A small crowd had already gathered there, and the air was thick with the scent of hot tears and sweat. Gate 102 had been delayed for 8 hours. A young girl was there, surrounded by people on the floor. Her face was as red as an apple. An airline staff member was practically in her face, shouting amidst a swarm of frantic passengers. She clutched her flight pass tightly while a woman cried out that her son was starving, desperately asking if anyone would help. Fees, fees, we must have them now, now, now. The shouting was relentless. The air was thick with intimidation as the girl on the floor sobbed. He watched her closely. As she wept, he suddenly realized that this was his opportunity. He didn't hesitate. With a burst of energy, he pushed his way into the very center of the massive crowd. Standing directly in front of the girl on the floor, he began to shout with all his might. The crowd was startled by his sudden outburst. He turned to the mother, acknowledging her crying son. He called out to the airline staff, asking if they intended to let the children cry until they broke. Is the plane leaving? The flight failed, and they should be responsible. But what do we need now? We need food and a place to rest. He urged them to keep up the pressure until the end. Turning back to the girl on the floor amidst the crumbling order, he spoke to her quickly. He told her that people were suffering, and the most urgent task was to quiet the staff. Send the staff to a hotel, let the people eat first, and then find them a place to stay. If you don't do this, things will spiral out of control. Will you take responsibility for that? She claimed she told them the food and hotel costs could be covered, but they refused to listen. The girl on the floor was determined to make them move the transport according to the flight cards. Was she really still trying to discuss the logistics of the situation at a time like this? He interrupted her and spoke to the child, noting how exhausted the young girl looked after 8 hours. She was still holding the child, yet expected to move vehicles just to earn her meal money. He returned to the mother and firmly asked for her flight card, offering his help. With an uncompromising attitude, he reached out his hand toward the mother to take the card. As if handing over a lifeline, the mother placed her flight card into his hand, and soon others followed her lead. The effect was immediate. Other passengers, many traveling with the elderly or small children, began to step forward. Looking utterly exhausted, they held out their flight cards, hoping for some semblance of order in the chaos. In just a moment, he had collected over 100 cards. He then turned back to the girl on the floor. Placing the stack of cards into her hands, he whispered for her to hurry and resolve the most urgent matters first. It is always best to settle things quickly, isn't it? He then asked her for 2 meal boxes in exchange. He promised to help quiet the children so that, in the end, everyone would come out as a winner. The girl on the floor looked at him with immense gratitude and quickly signaled the staff to bring the food. She noted that the flight cards he collected matched the meal boxes perfectly as she began distributing them. Quickly, she added 2 more boxes for him, her gaze filled with a silent, heartfelt thank you for his intervention. He had done it. His heart was racing, and though he felt a rush of success, a lingering unease remained. He urged the lady and the man nearby to eat quickly, handing them their portions without delay. With a practiced ease, he returned the remaining flight cards to their rightful owners, one by one. Finally, he took the 2 meal boxes he had secured for himself and tucked them safely into his bag. He called out to the crowd, telling them to gather their food, eat, and take a moment to rest. He suggested that after they regained their strength, they could continue to press the staff for their demands. As the crowd's attention shifted toward the food, he slipped away as quietly as a bird taking flight. He successfully escaped the thick of the crowd, knowing that to survive this game, one must stay mobile. To truly enjoy a better meal than the rest, he set off toward the next phase of his journey. And there, we see Gucci once again, who simply looked at him and uttered a surprised 666 in approval. Gucci suggested that his skills were so impressive he should discuss them with a movie protagonist, asking once more if he truly didn't want to join them. He wondered if they could cooperate, as they might need an alliance for help later on. To be honest, it was a tempting offer. Within a single day, Gucci already had 4 players by his side, but our protagonist refused the invitation again and simply took his meal boxes. He held onto those meal boxes tightly, knowing they were his most valuable prize for now. A little later, while he was trying to sleep, a sudden flash of hot, blinding light struck him directly in the face. A security officer barked at him to get up, claiming he couldn't sleep there. Naturally, the man remained completely unmoved. This young player clearly didn't recognize the NPC, and despite the warning, he simply went back to sleep. Suddenly, a group of security officers rushed out from a nearby street without saying a single word. They hauled him up and unceremoniously threw him out of the airport doors. And this is where things get truly interesting. On the game's public screen, an announcement appeared stating that player 13 had been expelled from the game zone along with another person. A massive debt of 10,000 was immediately issued, and shortly after, players from various other sectors were expelled in the exact same way. It seemed the system was forcing them out, intent on squeezing every last drop of profit from the player's misfortune. Exhausted and shivering in the cold, he felt as though his energy was being drained to its absolute limit. To prevent being caught again, he tried to stay hidden and conserve what little strength he had left. Covering himself with a tattered piece of clothing, he sat in a restroom waiting for sleep as the sun began to set. The system informed us that a day had passed, he had survived the round, and his energy had recovered to 75%. However, his food reserves had dropped by 50%, and he still hadn't found a proper chance to eat. He wasn't overly worried yet, though. He drank some cold water and consumed 2 packets of sugar to keep going. As he continued toward the restroom exit, he suddenly saw a player being knocked violently to the ground. The poor man was being dragged away by a small dog, a police dog that had clearly caught his scent. We see the officers surrounding the player, cornering him against a police car just outside the airport as he breaks down in tears. At that moment, the system announcement rang out once more, declaring that player 25 was attempting to flee. He was running from the police, desperately trying to escape over and over again, though his chances seemed slim at best. In District 1, the bombardment had turned the area into a literal battlefield, forcing everyone there to adapt immediately. Every moment felt like a struggle just to stay standing, and today was proving to be particularly brutal. By the following day, the chaos had spread from the schools all the way to this sector. Every single school in the region was now caught in the crossfire. It had been so long that the situation was becoming impossible to control. There was no way to block the influx of players, and the pressure simply wouldn't let up. With no place to sleep and no rest in sight, he finally sat down to have what passed for dinner. He used the last of his food bags, feeling a small sense of satisfaction as he managed to curb his hunger once more. On this day, his energy levels had dropped even further. This time, he decided not to just sit by a dark doorway. Instead, he stepped through a hidden entrance. At the very end of the corridor, he found something he had spotted earlier in the day. It was a hidden gem of a find, an old design studio that had been abandoned, its doors hanging open and the floor covered in trash. But once those doors were closed, it became a little world of his own, far away from the prying eyes of the system. He had only just entered the studio and hadn't even had time to shut the door behind him. Suddenly, he felt a wave of unease as he saw someone standing in the doorway, pushing it wide open. It was a man with the sharp, piercing eyes of a seasoned expert, and he was staring directly at our protagonist. Behind him stood 2 younger men, their arrogant posture making it very clear they weren't here to make friends. The expert looked at him and coldly ordered him to get out, claiming that this place belonged to them now. The voice of this expert sounded strangely familiar. Just yesterday at the cooking shop, he had been the most notorious thief of them all. He had even gone as far as to snatch the food bags right out of the hands of 2 other players. Knowing he was no match for a man like that, our protagonist decided it was time to leave this supposedly lucky find behind. But just as he reached the exit of the design studio, the expert suddenly drew a knife and leveled a cold threat at him. He demanded that he hand over every cent he had, along with whatever food he was carrying. The alternative was death. Looking into their eyes, it was clear they were more than capable of following through on such a thing. His heart was racing as he weighed his options. In a physical struggle, he stood no chance, but if he handed over the money, he would be hit with a staggering tax of 100 million. To be honest, neither option was particularly appealing. Thinking fast, he swallowed his fear and tried to de-escalate, suggesting to the man that they should just sit down and talk. He knew that if they stole from him, the system would treat it as though he had been officially plundered. The expert, however, had no patience for talk and told him to shut up and move faster. With the blade just 2 centimeters from his shoulder, he stopped resisting and handed over 500,000. He told himself that as long as he stayed in the game, he could eventually earn back that 100 million. Once the expert had the money, he shoved him out into the hall and slammed the door shut. From outside, he could hear them talking. It seemed that direct theft was a highly effective strategy in this world. They had realized that stealing money from another player wouldn't trigger an automatic expulsion from the game. Now, they no longer had to worry about failing or being kicked out for their actions. They discussed the specifics of the system's loopholes. While stealing from NPCs was strictly forbidden, stealing from other players, or even killing them, was apparently perfectly allowed, which, naturally, changed everything. In a world like this, one has to wonder who truly knows all the rules of the game. It was only the second day, and yet, he had already lost 500,000. A rough start, to say the least. With no money and no food left, he felt as though he were simply waiting for the end to arrive. A few hours later, a voice suddenly rang out across the game's public announcement screen, echoing through the halls. It urged everyone to hurry to the cooking hall in Zone A, specifically on level L3. The food there was supposedly half price. Just then, the elevator door slid open, and we see a familiar face. The expert appeared, his presence looming large. Our protagonist quickly hid to one side, watching from the shadows. He followed them stealthily to the shop, where he watched all three of them spend every last cent they had. They purchased a single box of candies, and as the sound of a successful payment echoed through the room, the system announced that players number 5, 49, and 61 had all triggered a specific condition. They were now burdened with a staggering debt of 100 million in fees, a heavy price for a bit of sugar. The expert lowered his hand, and, before the moment could even settle, he vanished into thin air. He disappeared like a fading beam of light, and the two young men followed suit, vanishing just as quickly. They left behind over a dozen bags of candy and several packs of cakes, scattered across the floor. He didn't waste a second. He dropped to the floor, using his clothes to bundle up the cakes and bread as fast as he could. It seemed his theory was correct. To be honest, he had suspected this might happen all along. The system had stated from the beginning that while debt payments could be collected, each player only started with 50 yuan. He wondered if such a massive debt payment was even possible, or if the system only targeted a player's liquid cash. While players could spend more than 50 yuan through debt, the expert's attempt to seize the food didn't trigger the same penalty. This meant that stealing someone else's food provided no help in clearing one's own debt. A vital distinction, really. Perhaps by tomorrow, more people would come to understand the true nature of these rules. But for now, he had his food. However, when it came to his survival strategy, he didn't follow any strict rules. He had to be flexible about where and when he ate. He knew that as long as he consumed this food, he would have no problem holding out until the very end. And so, he scouted 5 locations he deemed safe, hiding his supplies across them to ensure they remained secure. He prepared one spot for each day, giving himself a safety net that would last for the next 5 days. By the time he finished, his energy was completely spent. To be honest, he was running on fumes. Not long after, we see him return to his seat in the waiting room, where he finally let go and drifted into a deep sleep. As the game entered its 3rd day, a sudden, frantic commotion broke out nearby, immediately drawing the gaze of everyone in the surrounding area. The center of the chaos was player number 47. The girl looked fragile as she collapsed onto the cold metal floor, her body trembling with sudden, impulsive movements. She was breathing heavily, her face flushed a deep red that bordered on purple. Her boyfriend, who was also a player, looked on with an expression of pure distaste. He asked if she had pneumonia. He told her he hoped she wouldn't last until the 7th day. Player 47 could only manage a raspy, guttural sound in response. Her expression was strained as she suddenly felt a wave of intense cold. She looked at him and asked, "Ayon, can you hold me?" But he refused, fearing she might infect him. Suddenly, the entire station floor was filled with noise, as heavy, rhythmic footsteps echoed from a distance, signaling the arrival of the authorities. Epidemic control personnel dressed in white protective suits arrived and simply began to lift Player 47. She screamed for them to let her go, terrified of being taken away from the group. She begged to be released, but Ayon didn't even look at her. He simply turned his back and fled from the containment team, showing where his true loyalties lay, which, naturally, was with himself. The cost of her removal was 10,000 yuan. The other players watched, their eyes filled with tears of realization. The atmosphere was heavy with dread. Player 87 had eaten from a trash bin yesterday and was now suffering from stress-induced illness. Even a minor cold or pneumonia was a death sentence here. Deep down, he felt lucky to have secured his own food and water. Everyone wondered who would be next. Beside him, someone's mouth hung open, barely able to muster the strength to speak. It was just enough to keep his toes warm, he supposed. By now, he had learned the harsh habits of this game. Falling ill was simply not an option. Even a slight chill or a cough would get a player dragged out of the game zone immediately. He was grateful to be alive for another day, thanks to the pastries he had scavenged. Today, the air inside the bus felt different. The weather had turned much colder, making the area feel like a giant refrigerator. He eventually found a water tank and a metal skiing device. He managed to find a small enclosure within the metal structure to shield himself from the biting wind. As the 4th day dawned, more and more players were being eliminated from the competition. Waking up early, he decided to retrieve his hidden pastries. He carefully avoided the others as he headed toward his first stash. We see him approach the first hidden area, located in a secluded space at the back of the main hall. He moved between the floors, and as he drew closer, he reached behind an old sofa where he had tucked his supplies. It was empty. There was absolutely nothing inside. His heart sank as he stared in disbelief, refusing to accept what his eyes were seeing. He couldn't even find a scrap of the pastry packaging. He tried not to overthink it as he rushed to the next location. But there was nothing there either. One by one, he checked his 4 hidden spots, and every single one had been cleared out. Dozens of pastry packs had vanished into thin air. To be honest, this was his worst nightmare coming to life. Between last night and this morning, his guaranteed path to victory had been completely erased. Suddenly, his entire plan seemed to crumble. He wondered how someone could have found every single one of his hiding spots in one night. Moving everything at once wasn't something an ordinary player could do. He felt as though someone was watching him. A wave of dread washed over him. He began a desperate search for the missing pastries, but the silence was the only answer he received. More and more players were clutching what they could, despite the seller's warnings that they had hidden everything away. Every scrap of food had vanished, and even the cafe's pantry was bare, with sugar bags torn open and emptied. The trash area had turned into a literal battlefield where desperation was the only rule of engagement. Many players, even those fearing illness, continued to scavenge through the refuse for any morsel of food. When he went to search, he couldn't find even a single leftover, so he waited until 10 o'clock that night. Following his gut instincts, he walked toward a row of shops near the airport's reward zone. The other players were watching closely, certain that everything in the reward shops would eventually be cleared out. Not far from the trash area, he discovered a few bags and boxes left behind near a reward shop. It seems many travelers had chosen to discard their luggage here to avoid extra fees before their flights. He carefully tucked his boxes away, ensuring they were hidden from prying eyes before moving on. With his hands free, he made his way down to the first-floor exit, trying to stay one step ahead of the game. There, he discovered a hot water shop that was still open, and he realized he needed a place to rest. Perhaps he could find some free food as well. As he pushed aside a heavy pot, the scent of steam and smoke filled the air. He was greeted by a sweet smile that seemed almost too kind for a place like this. The attendant asked for his number, and he simply replied that there were 2 of them. He set down the reward bags he was carrying on a nearby chair, his movements heavy with exhaustion. A faint, weak voice drifted through the air, and feeling uneasy, he looked for a quiet corner away from the others. As he put his phone away, the attendant's smile widened, looking quite pleased with the situation. We see the attendant wondering who could possibly afford to buy so many things in a place like this. Clearly, he wasn't just another desperate player. The attendant then led him gently toward a small, makeshift bed. The belt felt tight as he sat down, and we see him pull out his phone, his fingernails tapping nervously. His fingers moved quickly across the screen as he dialed a number that didn't even exist on the device. On the other end, he heard the sound of someone crying, so he retreated to a quiet corner to hide. He whispered that he was waiting at the harbor's hot spring, having bought a flight to Paris. If they didn't arrive by 3:30, they would never see him again, a desperate ultimatum, to be sure. He ended the call and slumped against the table, his eyes immediately filling with tears of frustration. A server hurried over with a steaming spoon, some eggs, and a bowl of juice, noticing his distress. The server's voice was soft as he urged him to calm down and drink some water to settle himself. He barely managed to open his mouth, his emotions clearly getting the better of him in this moment. He drank a glass of surprisingly strong scallion juice before taking a bowl of rice for himself. After finishing a bowl of free roasted meat, the server approached his table once again. His eyes were filled with a loud, echoing sorrow, which only seemed to make him more agitated. His inner instincts were screaming that he had asked too much, so he immediately shifted his demeanor. Tears welled up in his eyes once more, and his voice sank into a heavy, low whisper. He truly didn't want to say another word. Deep down, he had never actually intended to leave. As he lowered his head, his shoulders began to shake violently, as if he were collapsing under the weight. The shop owner, absolutely terrified by the display, quickly brought a large dog over to him. He offered the animal for companionship, insisting that someone so handsome shouldn't be left to regret alone. And so, he found himself hugging a lame dog, feeling as though he were floating in a bubble of exhaustion. With his experience points reaching their limit, he realized he desperately needed rest and set his alarms. The morning microwave signals hummed as he sat there, worriedly clutching the dog to his chest. He lay back on the soft sofa and closed his eyes, drifting away as his consciousness began to fade. Deep down, he prayed they wouldn't abandon him, but after a short sleep, the owner suddenly woke him. The owner asked if his flight was ready, just as his phone began to vibrate with intense persistence. A warning notification flashed across the screen, and he grabbed the device without even checking the caller. He shouted into the phone that he had been waiting for 4 hours at the hot pot basement. He demanded to know if that person was really so important, threatening that he was leaving for good. He begged them to come see him for just one moment, before hiding his face and lying back down. He rested his head on the dog's paws, looking quite pathetic to any onlookers, until the owner told him to hush. The owner stopped and sighed, acknowledging the situation before carefully bringing him a change of clothes. And so, he slept the entire night in the lobby, and we returned to him the next morning as he prepares to depart. The owner even brought him a glass of milk, fried eggs, and tea, all of it completely free of charge. The owner looked at him and suggested he try to let those poor women find something better in life. He congratulated him on his new beginning, though our protagonist didn't actually eat a single bite. Since he hadn't eaten, he naturally didn't pay, simply whispering his thanks before walking out the door. His experience points were now fully restored, and his stamina levels had reached their absolute peak. This was a drastic method that could only be used once, and he had already played his hand. As the game entered its 5th day, he arrived at the hot pot basement just as a scandal was brewing. He encountered their group, which had already grown to 20 people, looking quite formidable indeed. They were busy distributing sticky rice, and the mere sight of the rice buns made his head spin. And then, everything exploded into chaos. He simply smiled at them, explaining that from the very beginning, this game was meant to be a one-on-one struggle. The other players could only survive by banding together to steal resources from anyone else they could find. Without money or food, a person has no value here, which meant they were destined to be eliminated. Before he could say another word, the system suddenly issued a new, chilling command. It welcomed the players to the 5th day, announcing that to make things more fun, a new rule was starting today. All water sources in the airline facility were being shut off, and even the bathroom taps were now useless foam. The fragile order of the game could no longer be maintained, and the public screens began to flicker with frantic messages. The crowd grew impulsive, shouting in rage that without water, they would all be dead within 3 days. Panic quickly overtook the group as the reality of their situation set in. They were being pushed to the brink. The slight joy of having food was instantly eclipsed by the terror of thirst, which was a far more serious threat. Our protagonist, however, didn't seem nervous at all, raising his hand to signal for silence amidst the chaos. His voice remained eerily calm as he asked if they were really that worried about a little thing like water. He pointed out that other players still had water supplies, and the only solution was to take it from them. His heart began to race, but there was no time to run as he found himself surrounded by 20 pairs of eyes. The large crowd began to close in on him, looking like a pack of hungry predators. They were desperate, demanding he hand over what was his, and the tension finally snapped. He used all his strength to protect his bag, but 2 hands were simply no match for dozens of reaching fingers. The straps were suddenly yanked away, and the bag was torn open, exposing his precious supplies. His heavy water bottles were violently snatched away as multiple hands tore at his belongings, leaving him completely overwhelmed. He was shoved roughly to the ground, yet even as he fell, he spoke without a hint of fear. The others sneered, telling him he should be grateful they hadn't killed him yet, which was a grim reality. He stood up and began to run, not to escape, but with the secret intention of stealing water. We see him reach the area where everyone had been forced to discard their water bottles at airport security. The rules were quite clear. No water bottle carried by hand could exceed a certain limit. Anything over 100 milliliters had to be abandoned at the security checkpoint before the flight. The passengers had simply tossed their bottles into large, professional-grade trash bins or collection trays. At this international flight security point, we find a potential goldmine of discarded resources. There stood 3 transparent trash bins, each half a meter high, filled with what was now liquid gold. The energy in the room shifted as he realized these bins were at the very center of the crowd. Some bottles hadn't even been opened, sitting there among the discarded belts and clothing of the NPCs. Searching the bins directly was risky, as it might trigger a security alarm or draw unwanted attention. He told himself he couldn't wait any longer. The opportunity was simply too great to pass up. Ignoring the suspicious looks from those around him, he walked quickly toward the security checkpoint. His target was those trash bins, and he politely but firmly asked the crowd to let him through. His voice rang out, causing the people waiting in line to turn and look at him in confusion. He urged the other players to make way, and for a moment, one of them actually stopped. He apologized quickly, his voice laced with a very real sense of urgency as he addressed the man. Pointing at the trash bin, he claimed he had dropped a silver heirloom from his grandmother inside. He begged for just one moment to retrieve it, hoping they would let him reach the bin. As he spoke, tears actually began to stream down his face, making the performance look incredibly convincing. The security guard was swayed in less than a minute and stepped aside, telling him to be quick and not interfere. He thanked the man 1,000 times over and immediately moved toward the bins, acting with desperate haste. To avoid alarming the others, he began moving the bins to a secluded corner where he could process them privately. He casually took the contents of 3 large trash bins, focusing entirely on what was hidden inside. He quickly retreated to a spot where the assistants couldn't see him, marveling at the sheer amount of water he'd found. With this much, he was certain he could last 3 days. He quickly cleared his bag and stuffed the bottles inside. He hurried out of the security zone, his heart pounding so hard he felt as though his chest might explode. He didn't dare stop until he reached a wide, secluded area where he could finally catch his breath. Feeling exposed in his current disguise, he closed the door, knowing he couldn't let other players see his true strength. He took the bins toward the water's edge, carefully wading in to begin concealing his newfound treasure. He lifted the bins and hid a portion of the water supply beneath the surface before stepping back onto dry land. After finding several holes to hide the remaining bottles, he ran back toward the international security checkpoint. He repeated his clever tactic, successfully scavenging another massive haul of water from the discarded containers. He hid this second stash as well, already forming an even more ambitious plan as the 5th day approached. By then, 67 players remained, though only 25 were part of the strictly organized main squad. The leaders treated the others like bothersome mosquitoes, forcing them to fetch water while they ate in peace. The players were given no food, and if anyone dared to resist the arrangement, they were met with immediate violence. The NPCs watched the players with cold indifference, offering no protection or intervention in their internal struggles. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed as a player collapsed to the ground, his body finally giving out to a severe case of pneumonia. The player simply stopped moving. Was he dead? The other players watched, uncertain and frozen in fear. A few white-sleeved NPCs appeared with body bags, moving with practiced speed to place the fallen player inside. The bag was zipped shut and he was gone. It all happened so fast, we barely had time to blink. Player number 9 was effectively removed, his life forfeited for a prize pool worth hundreds of millions. Word spread quickly through the group that the number of active players was dropping at an alarming rate. He realized he needed to find the right team, a group strong enough to stand against the others. He wasn't looking for just any squad. Over the last few days, he had been observing a specific group of faces. This was a 6-person unit led by Player 48, a group that seemed far more capable than the rest. These players looked sharp and disciplined, each member bringing a different set of skills to the table. They were strong, capable men. He followed them toward the restroom area to observe them more closely. After watching for a while, he noticed something unusual about their expressions that didn't quite fit the situation. One man's face was remarkably clean, while another was constantly chewing. They clearly weren't desperate for water. Seeing his chance, he approached them with a bag of rewards. "Hello," he said. "My name is Li Chuan." As Player 66, he expressed his desire to join their ranks. Player 48 stood up and looked at him. The leader eyed him with deep suspicion and told him to leave, claiming they weren't accepting any more members. In response, Li Chuan simply handed over the bag. Inside were 3 bottles of water, which changed the mood instantly. He told them he had secured a safe water source and could guarantee his team would never go thirsty. His real goal was to trade his water for a share of their food. "How much water do you have?" they asked. He assured them he could keep them supplied for 3 days. No, 7 days would be no problem at all. Player 33 looked at him with a mix of respect and caution, though he still seemed hesitant to fully trust him. All they needed to know was that he could obtain water and was willing to share it with the team. He made it clear that he was the only one who knew where his private stash was hidden. He promised to help the squad, but first, he needed to rest and consider the true nature of this place. The first safe box was almost certainly a trap designed to disconnect the system of anyone who reached it. The free water sources had been shut down, and the conservative teams were now keeping a close eye on the bins. They were constantly pushing the boundaries of the NPC's rules, yet this ironclad law could not be broken. Ordinary players were strictly forbidden from entering the team's designated territory, which was a bold move. If the system crashed, it would view this as an illegal invasion and proceed with an immediate purge. He didn't think the fearless ones would be sent to their doom, so he sent AC and Xiaoman to investigate. After sending the message, the leaders didn't let their colleagues advance, choosing a different path instead. We see them split into several small squads to guard their territory and keep others at a distance. Their strategy was to block anyone from scavenging, though they were careful not to touch the hot eggs themselves. While other players hadn't received their payouts yet, this particular team remained in a very profitable position. A few solitary players were causing a stir in the shadows, their expressions filled with a mix of fury and madness. Their value had clearly hit rock bottom, and by the end of the night, they would likely be cleared out. People like that are easy to manipulate, he thought, while hiding in a building with his colleagues. They spoke in hushed tones about the staff uniforms and the grip tape being held in the nearby smoking room. He whispered, asking if it had really been sanctioned, while the more timid players waited outside. They were watching closely, waiting for the perfect moment to seize the tape for themselves. The lonely player upstairs overheard this and suddenly felt a surge of excitement, as if he were being chosen. Lured by the smoke canister, he leaped toward the upper floor, moving through the shadows until he suddenly came to a halt. He realized he had been deceived, but it was already too late. The player had already triggered the alarm system. The locked door in the darkness held no tape or supplies at all. Instead, he had opened a trap. A smoke alarm immediately began to blare across the entire B2 level, echoing with a piercing intensity. At almost the same moment, 6 fully equipped security guards appeared, carrying fire suppression gear in their hands. They looked like divine beasts descending, and the atmosphere of anxiety shifted instantly as they moved in. The guards didn't care who had triggered the alarm or who had been tricked in the darkness. This breach was considered a serious matter, and the guards were treating it with grim efficiency. We see level B2 being locked down. From a distance, we can see that the entire floor was now under heavy surveillance due to the disturbance. Upstairs, the sight of those cash-filled containers was particularly stimulating, leaving them wondering what to do next. He noted that they couldn't even get close this time, while Xiaoman looked on with growing concern. He handed his phone to Xiaoman, telling her that taking this item to the lost and found office was now her responsibility. Xiaoman asked with great surprise why he wanted her to take it there, watching him move with sudden haste. He reminded her that he had learned the way, and half an hour later, Xiaoman delivered the phone to the office. He eventually arrived at the lost and found himself acting as though he were anxious to report a lost phone. A card used for system entry was also missing, and he saw someone from the airline wandering nearby. That man was also watching the perimeter closely, trying to find a gap in the security while observing the guests at the entrance. They were all using black cards, and in an airline this large, he assumed someone must have lost one. He began describing the appearance of the phone and the card to the staff member on duty. The staff member searched and indeed found his phone along with a currency card, asking if these two were his. He confirmed that yes, those were the two items, acting quite excited as he took the phone and the card into his hands. The staff member thanked him, noting that he would need to provide a small test to prove ownership. As the employee led him aside, he turned on the phone and pulled up a specific photo he had prepared. He went through the motions, showing the staff member that his face could indeed unlock the device. He explained that he had just taken a photo of the currency card, and after a quick check, the staff member was satisfied. Once he was allowed to leave, he walked toward the access room just as a group of people was passing by. A small tram arrived to take the visitors inside, and he managed to secure a spot among them. While sitting in the tram, he used his phone as a distraction while crawling further inside, naturally avoiding any prying eyes. Upon reaching the entrance of the access room, the security personnel took the card to verify it. As he passed the machine, the lights flashed green, signaling a warm welcome to the organization member. The front doors swung open, and we see the visitors inside the access room watching the proceedings with interest. Suddenly, someone called out about the card he was holding, and deep down, he felt a momentary surge of tension. He told himself that the heavy-set man was quite clever, as the group was led further into the room with the others. There was a palpable sense of awkwardness among the people in the room, as the odds of 6 against 10 felt quite uneven. Taking advantage of the general confusion, he moved quickly past the window and accessed the room's internal system. A voice echoed through the area like a thunderclap from the heavens, announcing a blessing for the 66-meter mark. It appeared that the items within this specific access room were strictly reserved for a very particular purpose. They were meant only for the 66 contestants, and only those who could successfully take them would be able to use them. The third emergency charging box was located right at the top of the central information display. Just above that central display sat an open tablet, completely exposed without any cover to protect it. With no hidden rules and no VIP restrictions, the scene transformed into a chaotic battlefield where only power and speed mattered. The man known as Shy gave up on the access room, instructing his members to quickly enter the elevator instead. Shy abandoned the room entirely, directing his team to move toward the information display as fast as possible. Since no one was watching the VIP entrance anymore, he took his chance and stepped out into the fray. He opened a container filled with enough supplies to keep the 7 of them fed and hydrated for a while. Even if only 3 people's worth of supplies were used, it would be enough to ensure they wouldn't be eliminated tonight. He told Lily that they were only in this position because of her, while the other players rushed toward the third box. Before they reached it, the group discussed how a massive amount of energy was likely stored in that final container. Shy completely removed his mask, revealing a much more ferocious and aggressive side as he charged forward. In his pursuit of the final box, Shy cast aside his disguise to unleash a truly brutal assault on anyone in his way. The remaining players fought Shy with everything they had, struggling desperately until blood was literally spilled on the floor. In the end, Shy's side grew stronger, while our group of 7 watched the carnage unfold from a safe distance. Lumo noted that a single box wouldn't be enough to satisfy Shy's partners, which was a troubling thought indeed. The first box had been far too difficult to obtain, suggesting there might be a fundamental problem within their team. The system's cold, mechanical notification chimed as the clock struck 11:50 p.m., signaling a grim turn of events. The environment grew incredibly tense as the system began the elimination process based on accumulated value. It calculated everything from food expenses to physical experience points across the entire sector's standards. Ultimately, the 20 players with the lowest value were marked for elimination, a cold reality of this game. The phone's voice remained silent as the numbers began to drop, and soon, everyone except our 7 survivors was gone. Every other player had been eliminated, leaving the remaining teams in a rather awkward and silent state of shock. By our calculations, the supplies in a single box weren't much, and now only 13 people remained in the game. As the announcement ceased, the entire airport felt the weight of the 20 eliminated players, each worth 10,000. Those lives represented a staggering 2 billion. If all other players were eliminated, the stakes would rise even higher. The final winner would walk away with 12 billion in total, a truly life-changing sum, to say the least. It was a number large enough to drive anyone mad, and we see the others beginning to eye our group hungrily. With blood still staining his face, Shy chewed slowly and turned to his colleagues to share a dark thought. He wanted them all hurt, but recognized their numerical advantage, suggesting they move our 7 players to one side. His plan was for the 13 to split the 12 billion prize, the safest way to ensure their own survival. Lumo's perspective was far more rigid. He warned the group to stay focused and avoid being sanctioned. Without even realizing it, the other teams were bound to unite against our group of 7. They would surely try to kill us first, Lumo noted, so we cannot afford to let ourselves be divided. He proposed that their 7 eliminate the other 13 instead, then split the 12 billion among themselves. It was the best solution available, though Panin asked, with a hint of wild desperation, how they could possibly kill them all. They were outnumbered, and for now, they could only wait to be hunted. First, they needed to find a place to hide. He suggested they scatter and find cover, mentioning that he knew of a perfect spot to disappear for a while. The news of Panin's potential elimination had been circulating for some time among the players still in the game. Every time a player was removed, a high-pitched, mournful wail echoed through the halls to announce their departure. It was always the same. As the 21st person was eliminated, the scene grew even more treacherous and trap-laden. A wave of distrust washed over the players, even as the announcement of safety was finally broadcast once again. The call to kill Noguchi, a former champion with a score of 200, signaled that the real hunt had begun. The news spread like wildfire, a staggering 200 billion reward for eliminating him, to be split among the survivors. The game erupted instantly. It wasn't surprising to learn Noguchi was a former champion, given his reputation. He looked strong, but in this madness, he was as good as dead. Noguchi desperately tried to explain he'd been framed. He begged them not to listen to such foolishness, claiming it was his first time playing, but his words fell on deaf ears. No one believed him. Of course, when faced with such immense profit, logic and reason tend to collapse immediately. The cry went out to kill him and see if he truly held the 200 billion. The hunt had become a frenzy. War broke out once again, and this time everyone had truly lost their minds over the legendary prize money. As the madness claimed another victim, our protagonist used the chaos to find an open service hatch to hide in. He slipped quietly into a large luggage trunk. In that dark, cramped space, he could only wait and listen. Peering through a small gap, he heard the uneasy sounds of violence echoing from the stairs outside the compartment. Time passed slowly as the system's announcements droned on, until finally, the sounds of struggle began to fade away. The room fell into a complete, heavy silence. He watched the stairs cautiously, his heart racing in the stillness. He saw only scattered debris on the floor, but then, the familiar voice of a teammate broke the quiet. It was Li Chuan. Li Chuan called out, asking where he was. Then Lumos's voice joined in, claiming he had caught Noguchi at last. Lumos urged him to come out, so they could kill the target together and share the 200 billion reward. From his hiding spot, he could see Lumos and Noguchi's limbs moving near the stairs, but he was too breathless to answer. Lumos had been standing right in front of his hiding spot the whole time, breathing easily, before he suddenly yanked the trunk open. A harsh red light flashed instantly as Lumos smiled, remarking how difficult it had been to find such a clever hiding spot. Lumos declared that the game of hide-and-seek was over, his voice carrying a terrifying, cold edge of triumph. A wave of cold panic washed over him as Lumos reached in with a powerful grip and hauled him out into the light. As he was dragged from the trunk, the truth finally clicked. The pursuit and the supposed war were nothing but a staged performance. It was all a calculated act, a way to exploit the rules and use others as tools to eliminate the competition. Their plan was simple: wipe out every other player until only the two of them remained to split the massive prize. We see now that they understood the game's hidden mechanics perfectly, using their anonymous status to lead players into a trap. They knew from the start that the final day would be a bloodbath, a realization that had guided their every move. Noguchi had focused on building one team from the beginning, while Lumos concentrated on forming his own separate faction. The goal was to have both teams clash and crumble on the final day, leaving the two of them with the ultimate advantage. Lumos laughed, looking quite pleased with himself, and thanked Li Chuan for being so well prepared for this moment. Over the past few days, Noguchi had clearly lost his patience, his voice growing sharp as he demanded that Lumos let him go. He questioned why they were still playing games instead of just sending the target to the next world immediately. Lumos looked at Noguchi as if he were joking. After all, why split 100 billion when you can have it all? He pointed out that Noguchi had already collected 200 billion in the previous round, money that Lumos felt belonged to him. And just like that, the alliance shattered. Lumos smiled broadly, clearly enjoying the turn of events. He casually mentioned that he'd sent out one final anonymous tip. Player 44 had been officially eliminated. The system announcement echoed through the area, declaring that player 44, the champion of the previous round, was gone. The 200 billion was being transferred to the hunter's account, a tidy sum for a day's work, to be sure. Lumos checked his device, but in that moment of triumph, a high-level lock-on warning suddenly flashed directly onto his face. A heavy, complex series of digital locks appeared right before his eyes, catching him completely off guard. Lumos let out a sharp whistle of surprise, covering his face and stumbling back as a wave of intense pain hit him. Our protagonist didn't waste a second, using his arms and legs to scramble toward the seats of the moving vehicle. We see that this hidden vehicle was far from secure. Neither the rear canopy nor the passenger doors had been properly closed. As the keys dangled within reach, Lumos let out a frustrated shout, his eyes fixed on our protagonist. He threatened to tear Li Chuan apart, his rage making him look more like a cornered animal than a master strategist. Lumos lunged forward, his blade grazing Li Chuan's head as the two of them scrambled over the vehicle's interior. Li Chuan's fingers finally brushed against the cold ignition key. He turned it, and the engine roared to life with a sudden, violent vibration. Without a second's delay, he threw the car into reverse and slammed his foot down on the accelerator with all his might. Lumos, caught completely off guard by the sudden movement, was thrown violently as the car lurched backward. he tumbled onto the hard ground. But even then, he desperately tried to scramble back up to his feet. Li Chuan swung the car around toward him, just as the system began broadcasting the final, fateful announcement. The prediction was confirmed. 48 players had been eliminated, and the final results were being tallied for the remaining survivors. The previous round's champion was gone, and his massive assets of 180 billion were being transferred as a final transaction. With only one player left alive in the entire game, the system offered its cold, digital congratulations to player 66. And so, against all odds, Li Chuan became the sole champion of this brutal round as the simulation began to fade. The prize money flooded in, 120 billion, then 200 billion, as the rewards for his survival continued to stack up. With the final 180 billion added, the total reached a staggering 500 billion, a king's ransom for a man who nearly lost everything. He climbed out of the seat, his movements heavy and exhausted, surrounded by the smell of oil and the remnants of the struggle. There was no sense of excitement, only a deep, hollow silence and the fading red glow of the elimination warnings. The alarms finally cut out, the white lights flickered back on, and the world of the simulation began to dissolve around him. Returning to reality, the system's voice echoed one last time. He was alive, and he was now the owner of 500 billion. But as we know, the rules of this world are never simple, and the players are rarely allowed to leave the stage so easily. The white lights finally faded, leaving Li Chuan with his 500 billion and the weight of everything he had endured. We see him surrounded by a crowd of people, each of them opening their eyes to the environment with looks of sheer shock and uncertainty. The system's voice welcomed the 100 players to the facility, announcing an initial fund of 5 billion for the group. The goal was simple: survive in the game for 7 days, and the winner would walk away with 100 million.